Thank you very much, Elon. Thank you. Let's give another hand to the Mayor Pro Tem of Charlotte, Susan Burgess. She has been a wonderful supporter of Hillary's, and she's one of those now famous superdelegates that all the candidates are fawning over. I don't want you to know I don't approve of that, but I did wash her car before we started this rally. I want to thank President Lambert and Mrs. Lambert and Mayor Tolley and his wife Joan. Thank you all for being here. And I want to thank Emily Baldwin, who's the Secretary of the College Democrats, who arranged for me to come today. Ladies and gentlemen, we had, or to be more specific, Hillary and the people of Pennsylvania had a great night last night. She won a 10-point victory, carried 61 of 67 counties, and was outspent almost $8 million on television. And she won anyway because the people who need a president thought she would be the best to turn the economy around, the best to bring our troops home from Iraq, to rebuild our military, to take care of our veterans, the best change maker to give the young people of this country a brighter future. I'm very grateful to them, and I hope North Carolina will follow their lead. Thank you very much for being here today. You know, I love coming to this place for one tiny reason and one big reason. The tiny reason is that I'm a crossword nut. And I read a study that says once you get past 50, if you do a crossword puzzle, a Sudoku puzzle, or a set of math problems every day, you cut your Alzheimer's chances by 50%. Anytime you see a clue in a crossword puzzle that says North Carolina College, the answer is always Elon. On a more serious note, I have a wonderful memory because when I ran for president back in 1992, we went out to small town America on bus tours. And on the last bus tour, we had a magnificent rally right here on this campus that I will remember for the rest of my life. But I have to tell you, when I was here before, it wasn't a beautiful day like this, and I didn't get to walk across the campus to meet you. This is one of the most beautiful places I have ever seen in my life. I wish I could go back to school. Now, let me talk a little bit about this coming election. North Carolina is the largest state still to vote. And aren't you glad your vote will count? And I hope you think we should count the votes of every American who has participated in this process. This is really important. And a big decision is facing the American people. We're now down to 3 candidates, 2 Democrats, 1 Republican. And in a funny way, all 3 of them are truly historic figures. And Senator McCain is too. You know, he and Hillary are good friends. She doesn't think he should be elected president because she disagrees with him on Iraq and on the economy. But he's a fine man. He and Hillary have taken reluctant Republican senators all over the world to show them how the globe is changing because of global warming. We now have a bipartisan majority in the U.S. Senate to do something serious about that, to save the planet for your generation. And I think that's a very good thing. But the real issue here is not which of these 3 admirable people will be the most historic. The real issue is who will make the best future for you. When we started this election, all the pundits, who are normally wrong, by the way, said Hillary can't lose the primary and can't win the general election. That was the conventional wisdom 15 months ago. And we were having dinner early in this election, and I said, you know I always disagree with them, and I'm sometimes wrong too, but I think it's dead wrong. I think you're going to have a hard time being nominated, and if you win, you'll be elected president by a good, strong margin because people will see that you're the best qualified person to turn the economy around, end the war, and make real changes that will guarantee the future. So I think you should do something to help yourself get through the hard times. Ask yourself right now, if you're fortunate enough to be elected president, how will you know when it's over if you did a good job? You think about that. How will you know when it's over if you did a good job? Because I can tell you, maybe this is just my weird perspective because I've been out of the White House almost as long as I was in. And my work today is very different. You know, I work out of Harlem in my foundation office. We try to help fight childhood obesity and diabetes among young people. We try to help the 28 million Americans who don't have a bank account get in the banking system. We try to help preserve small businesses in low-income communities. And we have 1.4 million people around the world in Africa, the Caribbean, Asia, and Latin America on the world's least expensive AIDS medicine, including about half of all the kids that are staying alive in the world today on it. We work on global warming projects in many American cities, in 40 cities on 6 continents, always with the condition that it has to create more jobs. So I see a different world, and I wondered how she would answer. This is the answer she gave. She said, I think if the people were to elect me and I got to serve, I would believe I had been faithful to the American people if I could say 3 things. 1, the people are much better off when I quit than when I started. 2, the young people of our country, our children and grandchildren, have a much brighter future when I ended than when I started. And 3, the country and this wonderful but perilous interdependent world are coming together instead of being torn apart. Now, my argument for her is simple. If you agree that those are the tests, she is by far the best candidate. And I want to tell you why. Let's start with America at home. This economy is in terrible shape. You all agree with that, right? And it's in terrible shape for several reasons. But there are 4 big reasons Americans are having a hard time making ends meet today. Why people are worried about jobs, they're worried about stability, they're worried about us being catapulted into a recession. And most Americans already think they're in a recession because most Americans are. The 4 reasons are these. Number 1, rising energy prices. You see it mostly at the pump. I got a sign here that says, help Hillary, $84 a week in gas just to go to my work and her school. Okay, that's the first thing. Second, you see it in rising food prices because that's being driven by energy. The average family will pay $450 a year more for gasoline this year and more if you drive further, and $250 to $300 more for food. Second big problem we've got is exploding health care costs and declining coverage. And you know that health care in America is already far more expensive than any other country in the world. We pay 16% of our income in health care. In real dollars, that's $700 billion more than you would pay if you took any other country's health system and dropped it into America, where everybody would be covered and the health outcomes would be better. And just let's do a test here, and I want you to remember this. Raise your hand if you know somebody without any health insurance. Now look around this crowd. There is no other wealthy country on earth where you would get that response. None. Not one. Nobody even asked the question because every other country at our income level has already found a way to cover every single person with affordable health care. The third big crisis is that about 1 million of your fellow Americans, and maybe as high as 2 million, and their families are facing mortgage foreclosures. I just read an article on the way in today that in the first 3 months of this year, almost 48,000 people in California alone have faced foreclosures. If that rate continues, we'll have more than 1 million foreclosures this year alone. Now, here's why you should care about it if you don't know a living soul affected by it. Every time a home is foreclosed on, it costs our economy between $220,000 and $320,000. You multiply that by 1 million, and it will blow away the expected positive impact of these little stimulus checks you're going to get in a few days. And you know what you're supposed to do with them, don't you? Go right out and blow the money. Don't pay your credit card down. Don't save it. You're just supposed to stimulate. But even if you do, and a million families lose their homes, it will be as if it never happened. So that's the third problem. The fourth big problem is that after I left office, this country went back to trickle-down economics. We abandoned the surpluses and the balanced budgets, which would have taken us out of debt within 6 or 7 years. And had that happened, there'd be no Social Security issue. And all these debates that Hillary and Senator Obama have had, there would not have been one question about Social Security. Nothing about the retirement of the baby boomers. You would have no worries that my generation's retirement would impose an unconscionable burden on our kids and their ability to raise our grandkids and educate them. But no, we went back to an economic theory that says you don't need a jobs policy. You just need to ignore the deficits, cut taxes for the wealthiest Americans as much as possible, and give as many taxpayer subsidies to the wealthiest interest groups, and then they will shower benefits on the rest of us. Well, to be fair, they did a brilliant job of the first part of that equation. But the benefits didn't come. Look at the difference in the 1990s when you gave me the honor to be president and this decade. Not to look back, because there's a reason they teach history here. You need to know the facts in order to get to the future. One of Hillary's biggest differences with her opponent in the Democratic primary is he keeps saying over and over again that there really wasn't much difference in what happened in small-town America and to Americans with economic troubles in the 90s as in this decade. He said it again in Indiana last night. Nothing changes in the 70s, the 80s, and 90s. Nothing's ever changed, and nothing will until I win. That's what was said last night. And so you be the judge. That's a good campaign statement for people with no memories, but if you said it in a history class, you'd get an F. Because in the 1990s, we had 22.7 million new jobs. In this decade, just 5 million. That's why wages are flat. That's why most Americans think they're in a recession. You got flat wages, college costs up 75%, health care costs double, energy costs up $2,000 before you have to get hit with this year's gasoline and food bills. 22.7 to 5. So what happened? Almost 8 million people worked their way from poverty into the middle class in the 90s. That is the American dream. In this decade, 5 million people fell from the middle class back into poverty, most of them while they were working full time. That's the American nightmare. In the last decade, after inflation, median family income across all races and regions of the country rose $7,500 a year. Actually, for African American families, starting with a lower base, the increase was over $8,000 a year. In this decade, median family income after inflation is $1,000 lower today than the day I left office. That's why most people think they're in a recession. So, you have to hire a president to turn the economy around, rebuild the middle class, and reclaim the future for the young people of America, or we're going to be in deep trouble. Now, what does Hillary propose to do about it? Number one, you've got to create more jobs in this economy. If you don't, wages cannot go up. You cannot have tight enough labor markets for working people to command higher wages unless there are more jobs. Here's her plan. Number one, follow every other successful wealthy country and make a serious commitment to energy independence through more homegrown clean energy and energy efficiency, and create 5 million jobs doing it. Now let me say this. This is not just politics. This is what I do for a living now in my post-political life. You look at any other rich country in the world that has growing wages and swelling jobs, they've all made a serious commitment to more energy independence and to save the climate from global warming through homegrown clean energy and through energy efficiency. You could create millions of jobs in this country if you just made more energy efficient every college building, every school building, every government building, every hospital, every auditorium in the United States. You can create millions of jobs in this country if we produce more solar energy, more wind energy, more geothermal energy, more biomass energy. Biomass is a fancy way of saying we should close every landfill in America and use all the garbage to make biofuels or to generate electricity, to clean up the environment, to create more jobs, and to save the planet. Why aren't we doing this? Because we don't have a system to do it. We fund yesterday's energy economy instead of tomorrow's. One of the reasons Hillary won in Ohio is that Ohio has a plant that produces more solar panels than any other one in America. So they're opening a second plant. Guess where? Not America, not China, not Mexico. Germany, where it costs more to do business. Now, why are they going to Germany? They'd rather open another plant in America. Because Germany, with less than a fifth of our land mass, less than a third of our population, where the sun doesn't shine as much, generates more electricity from the sun than we do, because they have a government interested in their kids' future and their jobs and their independence instead of yesterday's energy interest. So Hillary would repeal the subsidies given to the big oil companies, the nuclear companies, in the 2005 Energy Act, put it into a fund to create those kind of jobs for you. And it's one reason you ought to vote for her, because there are 3 people running for president, and she is the only person who voted against the Bush-Cheney energy bill, which was called the best bill corporations could buy. So we got to do that. You can do this everywhere. One of the reasons she won Texas, Texas generates more electricity from wind than any other country on earth. Within 10 years, it'll be known as the wind capital of America, not the oil capital. But you can do it everywhere, see? So you've got to decide if this is important to you. But we can create 5 million jobs. She wants to create 3 million more jobs by fixing the infrastructure of America, the water systems, the sewer systems. We are wasting water to beat the band because we have not modernized our systems in a long time. We need to fix our roads, fix our bridges. And I'll tell you something, energy jobs and infrastructure jobs cannot be exported. You have to be where the work is in America. These are 8 million jobs we can create in this country in the next couple of years. We've got to do it. Now, the second thing is you have to deal with the cost side of the problems. The number one thing that could be done to cut your energy costs, besides making all the homes and buildings more efficient, is to give people cars that get higher mileage. We should be driving cars that get 50 miles a gallon right now. The technology is right there. Furthermore, and this is why you need a president, you should know that there are 50 Americans today, 50, driving demonstration cars that get 100 miles to the gallon in town and 70 miles on the highway, with technology made in America. Now, why can't you get them? Because the technology costs $10,000 a car and you can't afford that. That's what you need a president for. All of you know that all electrical products go down in price as you put them up in volume, right? Think flat screen televisions, iPods, iPhones. All electrical products do. These batteries are made from a material called lithium, which is mostly in the ground in Latin America, and we need to figure out how to produce them more rapidly. If you could get them down to $2,500 a unit, what they do is basically they create a hybrid car on steroids. You know how hybrid cars work, right? 25 miles a gallon on the battery, then you're on gasoline. These run another 40 miles a day on the battery, which means you go to 40 miles a gallon, you're at 100 miles a gallon. I'm telling you, I talked to one of these guys last week. They are getting 100 miles to the gallon. Think what that would mean to your family's budget. This lady wouldn't have to hold this sign up here. Think of that. The average family would save probably $1,000 a year with that. Think what it would mean for your country. Think what it would mean to the students here for your future. You could say to all those nice people that sell us oil, we've been thinking about it, go on and charge us $117 a barrel. On second thought, charge us $200 a barrel. Charge whatever you want. We're going to keep our $350 billion in America and our families' budgets and our children's future and clean jobs of tomorrow to gain the security of America back. Now, why do you need a government? What does this have to do with the presidential election? Because this is what you need research for, to figure out how to make those batteries at affordable prices. When Hillary and I were young, President Kennedy said we had to beat the Russians to the moon. Those of you, and most of you will remember that, right? Of a certain age. Her position on this is simple. Surely if we could beat the world to the moon, we can beat the world to a car battery. If you want to do it, you should vote for her for president, and we'll get that job done. It will change your future for the better. Now, the second thing we have to do is to do something about health care. And this is a very serious policy difference in this campaign. Everybody who doesn't have health care contributes to the cost of the people who do. You have to decide if you agree with this. Every other country knows that you can't control health care costs unless you cover absolutely everybody. And of the three people left, Senator McCain covers the fewest, Senator Obama covers most, Hillary's plan is the only one that covers everybody, according to all the independent studies. That's why the American Nurses Association departed from precedent and endorsed her in the primary, because they said this is the biggest problem America's facing, and she's got the only plan that will solve it. And why Elizabeth Edwards, who, to be fair, is not endorsed a candidate, but said Hillary had a better health care plan. You just have to decide whether you think this is important. But I think I can explain to you in simple terms why you can't control costs unless you cover everybody. Number one, every time somebody pays for health care, they're contributing to $50 billion the insurance companies pay every year, figuring out how not to insure people. Think of it as your non-insurance premium. I mean, really, I'm sorry, sir, I'd like to give you health insurance, but you have a pre-existing condition. I'm sorry, ma'am, you do have a health insurance policy, it just doesn't cover what you need right now. I'm sorry, you have a policy, it does cover what you need, but I just reviewed your application and you forgot to fill out the third line, so I'm revoking your policy. $50 billion a year you spend on this. You wouldn't spend a penny of it if we were all covered, because it would be illegal. Second problem, bigger. 30 cents of every healthcare dollar, 30 cents, is wasted on paperwork. Is there a business in Elon that could keep its doors open, blowing 30% of its revenues off the top? No. Why do we do it? Hundreds of companies writing thousands of policies. They all cover different things. It's a nightmare. If we had her plan, and here it is, you wouldn't do that. Keep in mind, Medicare's administrative cost is 3 cents on the dollar. McKinsey and Company did a study last year that said Americans pay $200 billion more in paperwork costs for health care than you would pay if you had any other country's system. $200 billion. That's twice what you need to insure people. So here's her alternative. If you like what you've got, you can keep it. If you don't like it, you don't have it, or you can't afford it, then you can buy into the same plan that insures federal employees and members of Congress and our families. If it's good enough for our family, it should be available to your family. And that will make a huge difference. If you're young and single and on your own, all you got to do is have enough to protect you against a car wreck or an unforeseen illness. But if you have little kids and you need dental health coverage, you can get it. There is complete and good parity for mental health coverage. This is a good policy, and it's less expensive than you can get anything like it in another market. How can you pay for it and be made affordable? Because once it's illegal to spend $50 billion, you save that money off the top. You save a ton of the $200 billion in paperwork because we'll all be in big pools. You take the savings and give it to lower-income people, to small businesses, to family farmers trying to help their employees, to make sure nobody can pay more than a low fixed percentage of their income in health care, and everybody's covered. You just have to decide if this is important to you. But if you're tired of making excuses and you want to make progress, you should vote for Hillary for president and get a better health care plan. It will change the future of this country and enable us to restore economic growth. You cannot, I will say this again, I don't care who you elect president, if we keep doubling health care costs every 7 years, you can't bring the economy back. There won't be enough money to invest in education. People won't have enough money to consume. This is the first time in my lifetime that I've ever seen the labor unions, but bless their soul, they have always been for universal health coverage on moral grounds. If our family's got it, everybody ought to have it. But they're now allied with some of the biggest non-union companies in the country. The president of Walmart stood on the stage in Washington, D.C. with a bunch of labor leaders calling for universal health care. You know why? Because he knows if your health care costs keep doubling every 7 years, you won't have any money to spend at Walmart or any place else. So this is a big issue for the young people of this country. The third thing we have to do is get this country back in the manufacturing business. Hillary is the co-chair of the Bipartisan Manufacturing Caucus, and they have a plan that will bring manufacturing jobs back to America. Don't you believe we can't? We should repeal all the provisions of the tax code which encourage people to move jobs overseas and put tax credits in for people who will bring jobs back to places that have been left out and left behind. We should keep our defense manufacturing jobs in America. It's not good for the national security to be outsourcing the national defense. We can do that. The next thing we should do is to get America back in the research business. This administration has declared war on science. They've spent too little money and invested too much politics. She wants us to go back to stem cell research, to human genome research, to global warming research, to all these things that will make a difference. And let me say something. Everybody in this audience who is under 25 has a good chance to live to be 100. Now, an exceptional number of you will live to be 100 years old. And I know you're not shouting now, but trust me, the older you get, the better that'll look. But here's the deal. We got about 10 years where we can create more jobs than we know what to do with out of moving to a post-carbon future, making a different energy future. After that, we'll have to have a new source of good new jobs to spark the whole economy. And it will be in biotechnology. Because you don't want to spend the last 25 years of your life with Alzheimer's. You don't want to spend the last 35 years of your life with Parkinson's. You don't want to have your kids come into the world with this epidemic increase in the number of children with autism that no one can yet explain. I mean, it is breathtaking how much this has increased. Hillary is the founding member of the Autism Caucus in the Senate, has put out a great position paper on this. We got to find out what's causing this and figure out how to fix it. It is a huge problem. And we have to do genome research and stealth sim research to do it. Now, I could give you lots of other examples, but this is really important. The next thing we need to do is to tell the whole truth about trade. Now, to be fair, both candidates have had some very interesting things to say about trade in this election. And they've said, we're not getting a fair deal, we need to change the trade laws. Hillary thinks we need to change NAFTA, put labor and environmental standards in the trade bill, have one person publicly responsible for trade enforcement that makes a report every month. But the reason you should support her position is that she has told you the whole truth about trade, which is that you will never get control of the trading system in America as long as we are running these big deficits. And let me explain why. You all know we have big trade deficits with a lot of countries. In order, they are China, Japan, Korea, and the oil exporters. It changes. Some months it's Saudi Arabia or Canada or Mexico, Venezuela. But the people that sell us oil always have the fourth biggest trade surplus with us. Now, every day we have to borrow money to pay for these ridiculous deficits to cover the millionaires' tax cuts and the special interest and the soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq and all that. Guess who we borrow money from? In order. You couldn't make it up. China, Japan, Korea, and the oil sellers. Now, do you see why trade enforcement is 1/5 what it was when I was president? I mean, you're not going to leave here and barge down to the bank and slap the daylights out of the bank president, are you? Couldn't get a loan tomorrow morning. This is not China's fault, or Japan's fault, or Korea's fault. It is America's fault. Nobody made us give up our balanced budgets and surpluses. The president and the Congress decided to do it. If you go on her website at hillaryclinton.com, you will see how every last red cent of everything I've mentioned today is paid for, and she will take this country back to balanced budgets and give the young people in this audience their future back. It is profoundly important, and I hope you will agree. You cannot be, in a globally interdependent world, you cannot be an effective social progressive unless you're a fiscal conservative. You've got to gain control of your finances in order to invest in education, in order to invest in health care, in order to create jobs, in order to make this energy transformation we've got to make. Otherwise, we'll always be on the hook and at the mercy of other people. It is very important. Now, let me just say one last thing about this. Since we're at a university, you can create all these jobs and make all these opportunities and pave the way to a brighter future, but we have to do a better job of preparing our young people for it. There is no state with a higher awareness of the connection between improving education and a growing economy than North Carolina. You should all be proud to be in school here because of the consciousness that exists in this state. But we are a long way from where we need to be. Hillary basically wants to do three things in education. One, provide universal preschool to all of our kids so that an increasingly diverse group of American children get off to an even start in school. Secondly, do something drastic to overcome the problems created by No Child Left Behind. And let me say, you will all get this, but all of you want the young people in school coming along behind you to learn at world-class levels, don't you? I mean, you know they're in a global economy, you want them to. I hope you know they can. This is not a political statement, this is a scientific fact. We now have very sophisticated brain imaging technology that can measure the capacity of the human brain. We know that almost 100% of all the young people in this country, without regard to their family income, their first language, or their race, can learn everything they need to know to do well in a global economy. Okay? That's a fact. That's not a political statement. We now have documented proof of that. We know that there's a learning gap between most American students at the 8th and 11th grade, where we have good international tests, and kids from other rich countries in science, math, foreign languages, and technology. We know why it exists. They go to school longer every year. They start the hard courses earlier. They have national standards of excellence they've worked on for decades. And relative to other professions, they pay their teachers and educators much more, train them harder, and retrain them for a lifetime. Okay? So that's the landscape of all the young people coming along behind you. By the way we've always caught up is because of people like you. That is, we have a higher percentage of people going on to four-year colleges, so we sort of catch up. But the reason that we got this gap is that. What's wrong with No Child Left Behind? It says we're going to close this gap by having you give your kids 5 tests, 5 years in a row, and giving you federal money based on how you do on the test. This is not going to work. Why? First of all, 80% of all the schools in America have already cut back on history, on economics, on music, on the arts. They have degraded the quality of education because this thing's not funded. Secondly, if you wanted to use a test, you'd pick a hard test with a high score, and it'd be kind of like a basketball team trying to get into the NCAA from a small school the first time. You say, I don't care if it takes us 10 years. We will be gaining on them every year, right? If you did that, you would lose all your federal money. The school budget would collapse. If you pick an easier test with a low score, you'll get the check every year, but the students and the teachers and the parents and the principals will hate it. You spend all your time teaching to the test, and over time the kids learn less, not more. This doesn't work, and Hillary will change it to put truly qualified new teachers in our schools as 2 million age out, and to create a positive system of identifying schools in America that right now are performing at world-class standards of excellence, and they're there. And figuring out what they're doing right and do it in every other school. Let me tell you, a quarter mile from my office in Harlem, New York City, the Frederick Douglass Academy, a public school, 100% minority, African Americans and Hispanics. Over half the kids live below the poverty line. They have a 98% on-time high school graduation rate. They have to take the New York Regents exam to get a diploma. It's been there for decades, and it's not easy. Their pass rate is higher than the state average, not the city average. 92% of them go to four-year colleges, and 90% graduate on time. Don't tell me all our kids can't learn. They can. We just need a better system, and Hillary will give it to you. And finally, we've got to make it possible for every young American to do what you're doing. There is an iron law of economics for young people in America today. If you get a high school diploma and at least 2 years of education after high school, your chances of getting a job with a rising income are better than 50-50. If you don't, they're less. Now, can you beat the odds both ways? Sure. You got a 4-foot vertical jump, you can play basketball. And you might have a graduate degree in information technology and have your job outsourced. You might go down the other way. But you have to play the odds, which means we have to make college affordable, and it's steadily becoming more unaffordable for millions of Americans. So, here's Hillary's position. Number one, raise the current tuition tax credit from $1,650 to $3,500 a year. Number two, raise the Pell Grants every year to keep up with inflation and college costs. Number three, crack down on the abuses of these private student loan companies that are ripping people off at 14, 16, 18% interest a year. Let me tell you something. When Hillary and I were in college, we were poor as church mice. I had loans up to my ears and 6 jobs by the time I was in law school. Now, to be fair, I never had more than 3 at once. But you know something? I was the first person in my family to go to college. My family had no money. My state was the second poorest state in America. But my government loaned me money at 2% interest. You know what that says to a young person? And believe me, even my mama never thought I'd be president. I was just some kid trying to get through, you know. Do you know what it says to have your government say, I value your future? Why in the world are we giving taxpayer guarantees to people that charge you 16% when we could loan you the money directly at much less? When we did that when I was president, we had 10 million more young people getting help. They saved $1,300 on every $10,000 they had to repay, and the taxpayers saved money because people like you did not default on their loans. And she will take us back to that. Now, just 2 more things. She believes if you get out of school and you're not going to get rich because you're in public service, if you're a teacher, a nurse, a police officer, a fireman, a mental health worker, your service should repay your loan, and every year you serve, you should knock some of that loan off. Now, this is one thing you do not have to take Hillary's word for, because she is the only person in this race that's done anything to make college more affordable. Last year, near the end of the year, she left the campaign trail, went back to Congress to pass a bill she sponsored called the Student Borrower's Bill of Rights. Here's what it says. It says, now when you finish here, no matter how much you borrow or how little you make, you cannot be required to pay more than a certain small percentage of your income over a longer period of time. Now, why is this important? Today in America, thousands of young people are dropping out of college because they say, I cannot possibly borrow $10,000 or $20,000 more dollars. I know what I'm going to make when I get out of here. I can't make the payments. You got thousands of people bagging it. This is nuts. A college education is worth well over $1 million to you over your lifetime, and therefore well over $1 million to all the rest of us who share this country with you. It is crazy. Now, because of this bill, no young American, no matter how much they borrow or how little they make, will ever have to drop out of college again because they're afraid to borrow a little more. That's a good reason to vote for her for president. That's what you hire a president to do. Now, one other thing. The next president will be the commander-in-chief of the armed forces and the diplomat-in-chief of the country. I think she's by far the best qualified of all of them. And here's why. Because she has truly distinguished service and bipartisan achievement on the Senate Armed Services Committee, passing bills always with Republicans to get body armor to the troops quicker, to guarantee that members of the National Guard and Reserves from North Carolina, for example, once they serve, when they come home for life, they now get the same health care benefits that regular military personnel do. This is a very, very big deal to them. And there are lots and lots of other examples of this. There is a reason why the first serious woman candidate for president is the one who has been endorsed by 2 former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the top military officers in the country, including General Hugh Shelton from North Carolina, who was the commander of the Special Forces Unit headquartered at Fort Bragg. 35 retired generals and admirals. One reason she won in Pennsylvania is that the 2 members of the Congress most identified with their strenuous opposition to the Iraq War, their demand for an immediate withdrawal, but their support for the American military are both Pennsylvania congressmen, retired Admiral Joe Sestak and Jack Murtha. They both endorsed Hillary for president because they think she has the best plan and the best skills and the best ability to bring the troops home from Iraq, to rebuild a badly strained military, and to take care of the veterans of this country. And we have a huge load here. We have 70,000 wounded veterans, and 2,000 or more of them have traumatic brain injuries. So you can say you disagree with them, and they don't know what they're talking about, but the people that make a living and have made a living both defending this country and who agree it is time to bring the troops home from Iraq think she's got the best plan that will maximize our national security, rebuild the military, take care of the veterans, and I think their endorsement ought to count for something because she has really delivered the goods for these people. In February, when Hillary was out of money and losing all these states to Senator Obama, the caucus states primarily, she won the veterans vote. Everywhere we went, she'd win the veterans vote because they knew she had actually done something for them and would always be there. Now, I do not think there is a young person in America who will vote in this primary based on who would take best care of the veterans, unless you have somebody in your family that's been affected by it, who appreciates the fact that she passed a bill to test every man and woman coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan for traumatic brain injury and is committed to a health care system that will bring them back. But I want to tell you a personal story. If we don't do this right, if we make the shameful mistake we made after Vietnam and confuse an unpopular war with our obligations to the people who served in it, you, the students here, will pay the biggest emotional price, and you'll pay it for the rest of your life. I know there are 200,000 homeless veterans in this country today. Almost all of them are Vietnam vets who have their generation's version of what you call post-traumatic stress disorder. And if they had had what's in her GI Bill for the 21st century, counseling, mental health care, a veteran's home to live in if they couldn't live on their own, access to education, small business loans, this would have been a more noble, more decent country the last 30 years, and people in our generation would not have to live with our failure. I don't want you to have to live with it, and it's another reason to vote for her for president. Now, the final thing I want to say is this, and nobody else will talk to you about this, but because I've had the job, I know how important it is. The thing that really matters in a president is whether you're a change maker. If you agree that the test is, are people going to be better off and do the young people have a brighter future? And Harry Truman once said that it's really hard to be a change maker when you're president. He'd even sign executive orders and nothing would happen. She is the best change maker I have ever known. And if I had never been married to Hillary, but I just known her, I'd be working just as hard for her, because I have never known anybody who could look at a problem and figure out what to do about it better. When we were in law school, everybody was dying to get out. I mean, come on, we've been to school forever. We were up to our ears in debt. Enough already. And back then, it was a big deal for a woman to have a law degree from a prestigious school. She took another year and worked at the hospital because back then there were no protections in American law for children against severe child abuse and neglect if it happened in the home. None. So they came up with some guidelines, she and her colleagues, to figure out how to change the law and protect the family unit. And now every state in America, starting with the work those guidelines sparked, protects their kids against severe child abuse and neglect. She was making changes as a young woman. When we got out of school, she went to work for Marion Wright Edelman at the Children's Defense Fund for a very low wage when she could have had all these high-dollar jobs, and was knocking on the doors of poor people's houses in New Bedford, Massachusetts, to find out how come their kids were dropping out of school. Almost all of them were dropping out because they had minor physical and mental disabilities, and our schools had no provision then to take care of these kids. The buildings weren't handicapped accessible. There were hardly any teachers who could even teach a kid to read with a minor case of dyslexia. The work those young people did for the Children's Defense Fund was sent to Congress and led to the passage of the special education law that guarantees an equal and appropriate public education to all of our kids. It changed America for the better, and she was doing it as a young woman. In the Democratic primary in Arkansas, where Hillary has not lived in 15 years, she got 70% of the vote. And all the time they're saying, oh, this woman's from New York. Why do you want to vote for her? 65 to 85 people from that state, a lot of them who couldn't afford the money to make the trip, have gone all over America campaigning for her. Some of them will be here in North Carolina before it's over in the next 2 weeks. And they've got this little brochure you ought to read if you see one that they wrote. Look at the changes she made in our lives. The people in rural areas who had health care because she brought it there. The poor people in the Mississippi Delta without any education who were taught to be their children's first teachers, one of the most successful preschool programs in the country. A school system that she helped to shepherd the reforms of that was ruled one of the two most improved school systems in the country. She raised the money for America's first rural development bank to loan money to men and women who lost their jobs in factories in the 1980s where they couldn't get anybody else to give them a loan. That bank is still roaring. And in the latest poll in Arkansas, Senator McCain was running 16 points ahead of her opponent, and she was running 15 points ahead of Senator McCain. And that state has only voted for Democrats 3 times in 44 years. Twice was for me. They pretty well had to do that. Why are they for her? Because she changed their lives. There are farmers from rural New York. A lot of you don't know this, but you'd be amazed how much rural New York is like rural North Carolina. 40 of our 62 counties voted for President Bush over John Kerry. They're Republican counties. When Hillary ran for re-election, she got 60% of the vote in those counties. And these people in these counties are going all over the country saying, you know, you ought to think about voting for this woman. She is the only public official that ever actually did anything for us. And the other night I was in Hickory, North Carolina. You know where that is? I did 7 of these little stops like we're doing now. That was the 6th one. And when I finished, I got down off and I did what I'm about to do. I was going around here shaking hands. And I got to the last person. And the last person was a woman who grabbed me by the arm and she said, look at my daughter. Look at my daughter. I was kind of scared to look down. And I looked down as a perfectly normal teenage girl. And I said, tell me about it. She said, she's why I'm for Hillary for president. I said, what do you mean? She said, look, I know when you were president that she took the lead on all these family issues. The Children's Health Insurance Program, the biggest expansion of health care since Medicare. And the thing I care most about is adoptions. This woman had it down. She said, I know that she did this work and got Republicans and Democrats to support a radical overhaul in the adoption laws. I said, that's right. $5,000 tax credit for adopting a child with a disability. Said, you adopt a child from overseas, they become a citizen the minute they hit the ground here. But she said, the thing that matters most to me is that the changes she made doubled the rate of adoption of children out of foster care. So he said, and she looked at me and this woman said, Hillary saved my daughter from a life in foster care and saved me from a life without my daughter. Now, you just have to decide whether this kind of stuff's important to you. But I am telling you, you will never find anybody that's done this more. Robert Kennedy Jr. introduced me at a rally for Hillary in North Carolina the other night. And he was just talking about how she was his neighbor, she was his friend. He couldn't believe all the mean things that were said about her. And then he joked, he said, remember, she had a fanatic Republican spend $40 million trying to destroy her. She is the only certified honest person who has ever run for president. Because if they could have gotten anything on her, they would have, and every charge they ever threw at her turned out to be false. I'm telling you, she's the best change maker you'll ever find. Now, you can say you don't care. You can say it doesn't matter if you turn speeches into solutions and promise into reality. But I think it does. I once spoke on your behalf to 1 million people. 1 million in Ghana. And I was a pretty good speaker back then. And it was a rush. It was also good for America. It was good for America for them to know in Africa that we were pulling for them. But next time I went to Ghana, I was just Joe's citizen. And I went because the government wanted me to help them provide economic opportunity for poor people, and I was trying to help them with their AIDS programs and other things. So I'm leaving the country. I'm on the tarmac of the airport, and there is one woman, not a million, one, screaming at me, don't go, don't go. And she's waving something. So she comes up to me and she said, because you supported an Africa Growth and Opportunity Act to buy products that we make, which, by the way, everybody in America supported. It didn't do anything to hurt our economy. She said, I'm one of 400 women that have jobs in our community for the first time. We never got a paycheck before. And as a result, all of our children are in school for the first time, not working. So we make shirts. And you changed our lives forever. So here's your shirt. Now, I took that shirt home and I put it in an open shelf in my closet. Every morning, this morning when I got up, I look at that shirt. And it reminds me that that woman is not mad at America. She does not want her kid to grow up to fight in an African tribal war. She does not resent that we make more money than her because she believes that we want a shared future. That's what America and the world needs, shared prosperity, shared opportunities, shared responsibilities across all racial and religious and gender and age lines. And the point I wish to make here is this. I love speaking to that million people. But the woman with her shirt matters more. And that's why North Carolina should support Hillary for president. Thank you, and God bless you.